Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Certainly glad you're all here. If this is your first time here or your 101st time here, we're glad you're here. If you carry the weight of a weary world on your shoulders, or you entered through the doors with a song in your heart and a skip in your step, we're glad you're here. If you're the loudest voice in the town square or the subtle hand behind the scenes, we're glad you are here. If you have failed once or 1,000 times, we are glad you're here. If you sing like angels or mumble behind the hymnal, we're glad you're here. This community is what it is because of your presence. So welcome into this space of love, support, justice, compassion, fellowship, and worship. We light our chalice as a symbol of gratitude to celebrate the brightness of our community in easy times and challenging times. In this sanctuary, we create strength in unity and multiply that strength with compassion and generosity to all who need it. Perhaps many of you saw an essay in the New York Times yesterday, written by Tatiana Kennedy Schlossberg, Caroline Kennedy's daughter and President Kennedy's granddaughter. Tatiana and her husband are parents of a 3-year-old boy and a 1-year-old baby girl. On the day her daughter was born, a routine postpartum blood test showed that Tatiana has acute myeloid leukemia, a serious, often fatal blood cancer. Since her daughter was born, Tatiana has endured almost constant treatment, much of it toxic, to try to extend her life. Her doctors and she tried everything possible to keep her cancer in remission. Tragically, they were unsuccessful. Tatiana has been told now that she has 1 year to live. Truthfully, she looks like that 1-year estimate is probably too generous. I don't know Tatiana. I do know her mother, with whom I worked years ago to assist her when she was writing a couple of books about the US Constitution. Tatiana's essay is a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of gratitude. It demonstrates the limits of power and wealth to control what happens in our lives. Tatiana's family has the resources to cushion much of the physical impact on them. And Tatiana has been allowed to get treatments at home that would normally require hospitalization. But the heart-wrenching fact of her illness is taking the same toll on this family as it would for any of us. Thanksgiving is a good time to remember that every day is precious for all of us, and to resolve to live each day with gratitude. And now our speaker, Eddie Correia, will talk to us about the psychology of gratitude, a very timely topic. And for those of you who are not completely familiar with Eddie, he's my husband. He and I have both been members of the congregation for quite a lot of years. And we live in Washington and have a house down here part-time. And Eddie's a real smart guy who really likes spirituality.
Well, thank you, Carol. Everybody probably knows who Walt Whitman is, a 19th century poet. Our kids, some of our kids went to Walt Whitman High School in Bethesda, named after him. I always thought it was great that Montgomery County named a high school after a gay poet, but they did. So this is about him. His favorite occupation seemed to be strolling or sauntering about outdoors by himself, looking at the trees, the grass, the flowers, the vistas of light the varying aspects of the sky and listening to the birds, the crickets, the tree frogs, and all the hundreds of natural sounds. It was evident these things gave him a pleasure far beyond what they gave to ordinary people. Until I knew the man, it had not occurred to me that anyone could derive so much absolute happiness from these things as he did. He was very fond of flowers, either wild or cultivated, liked all sorts. I think he admired lilacs and sunflowers just as much as roses. Perhaps, indeed, no man ever lived that liked so many things and disliked so few as Walt Whitman. He never spoke deprecatingly of any nationality or class of men or time in the world's history or against any trades or occupation, not even against any animals, insects, or inanimate things, or any laws of nature, nor any of the results of those laws, such as illness, deformity, or death. He never complained or grumbled either at the weather, pain, illness, or anything else. He never swore. He could not very well, since he never spoke in anger and apparently never was angry. He never exhibited fear, and I do not believe he ever felt it. Thus it has come about that many persons today regard Walt Whitman as the restorer of the eternal natural religion. He is even explicitly compared with the founder of Christian religion, not altogether to the advantage of the latter. Thanksgiving coming up, and so obviously if you haven't thought about it now, you will be thinking about what you're thankful for. Probably a long list. I know we used to do that with our kids. We would play this game where we'd go down the alphabet and then go around the room, and then you'd name something that you were thankful for with each letter. You're probably more thankful for family than you are for X-ray and zebras, which we usually ended up with, but it's still a long list, and it's a lot of wonderful things. Problem is we don't do that enough. So how can we do that more, have those feelings more often and more intensely? Reading about Walt Whitman, it's very impressive. He seemed to have the gift, if that's what you want to call it, of being grateful for all the things around him. Not just temporarily, but seemingly all the time. People, woods, flowers, the rest of it. Why do we find that hard? I want to talk about 6 problems. Easier to state the problems than the solutions, but the first one, psychologists call the hedonic treadmill. The problem is that you do get some burst of pleasure from some achievement. Maybe you get an award, or you get a story about you in the newspaper, or your kids are particularly good to you, or something. And you feel that rush of pleasure. Then a day later, maybe a few hours later, the pleasure fades. It may be related to the way brain hormones work that bring us pleasure, dopamine, serotonin, others. But then, so you need another stimulus. And maybe you get one, maybe it takes a while. And then you get another spike, but then it fades. And maybe the next time you need an even bigger stimulus to get you back to that level of happiness. It's kind of like a sugar high. You take glucose, you eat a donut in the morning, and you get a sugar high and feel that burst. But then insulin rushes into your bloodstream, and you have a lowering of the blood glucose, and then you need something else. So the problem is the first rush of pleasure fades, and then we need another stimulus. Now, it's not realistic to expect that our feelings, our high, is going to always stay the same. It's not. The problem is how to avoid the ups and downs and that need for something else. Now, at extreme level, if you're a national leader and you need something new, some new show of power, some new a need for people to be sycophants around you. Then that can be very destructive, particularly if you end up doing crazier and crazier things to get that rush. The second problem I'm going to call the comparative problem. The problem is this: comparing our life with others. You know, our house seems wonderful until we go into a mansion. And our upcoming trip to Maine sounds great until somebody tells us they're going to Paris for 3 weeks. Suddenly that undercuts the sense of enjoyment because we're comparing what others are doing with what we are doing. You know, by historical standards, we're probably richer than ancient kings, materially richer. We live in better housing, we've got better food, we've got better health care, we've got all kinds of things. But we don't feel like kings because we compare ourselves to the people around us. Now the kings, the actual kings probably felt like kings because the people around them were desperately poor. But we're not in that situation. It's probably related to some sense of inadequacy that drives us continually to compare ourselves with others. To compare the, not the objective reality, but focus on the subjective sense of pleasure. The third thing is what I'm going to call the wrong focus problem. And the underlying problem is you focus on short-term disappointments rather than the long-term wonderful things in your life. You know, at any given moment, think about how many wonderful things are in our life that we could feel great about. You know, people love us. We live in a country that at least historically has been a good country that's provided a lot of freedom. We live in a beautiful part of that country. There's plenty of food in our refrigerator. It's good to step back and take in the big picture, because the big picture can be very, very good. The problem is to focus on one thing that's a disappointment, and it might be pretty trivial, you know. Someone's rude to us in the supermarket or overcharged us $20 or somebody suggests we're not dressed appropriately for an occasion or whatever. And that is what we focus on. Now, intellectually, it's easy to see that's happening. What's much harder is to control it and avoid the problem. But intellectually, small things can knock us for a loop and make it hard to shake it to see the big picture. The next problem is what I'm going to call the negative instinct problem. You know, every situation in life presents some positives, some negatives. And in fact, the positive may far outweigh the negatives. The problem is if we instinctively focus on the negative things, because they're always going to be there. It's the glass half empty versus glass half full problem. You know, it comes up with our reaction of people. Nobody, well, except Carolyn perhaps, is perfect. Everybody's got their good qualities and their bad qualities. But if the instinct is to focus on the bad qualities, I mean, that's all we see. That's what we put the weight on. You know, we meet someone and they don't laugh at our jokes, or they talk too much about themselves, or, you know, they seem negative about what our life is about. Maybe they don't even ask about our life. So we instinctively dislike them. I'm from Oklahoma. You know, probably the most famous guy that ever lived in Oklahoma, or one of the most, was Will Rogers. You know Will Rogers, and he said, "I never met a man I didn't like." Now, that's probably not literally true. Probably wasn't literally true for Will Rogers, but you know, it reflects a state of mind. It's a useful myth. So what makes us react the way we do? I mean, with certain people, it could be just a sense of boredom. Not to say any of you all are boring by any means, but some people are really boring. And even beyond that, some people are offensive in the way I've described. But that's not all there is to them. So I don't recommend being with people that you just, after a while, you really don't like their company. But I think it's still worthwhile to always focus on the positive things people have to offer. Empathy is the key because these people, they've got their own problems. You know, they've got all the problems on this list. The next problem I'm going to call the stress problem. We've all got this to one degree or another. The problem is excessive worry about certain things in our life that makes us worry, makes us very anxious. You know, could be small. Got to get that package back to Amazon, you know, in 2 days. Could be very large. You worry about serious health issues or of yourself or loved ones. Or on a global scale, quite justifiably, you feel stress about Gaza or about Ukraine or the latest pronouncement from the White House. That justifiably, understandably, is a stressful situation, is a stressful stimulus. The problem is getting caught up in that because it screens like a screen over the good things. You're so caught up in the stress. And what makes it worse is choosing a bad way to deal with that stress. You know, could be drinking, could be brooding, could be snapping at someone else. It's a frequent problem with Carolyn and me. I'm the one that snaps, and then that leads to an argument. Then that leads to feeling guilty about snapping. And so it's like Buddha's second arrow. Remember the Buddha's second arrow issue. The first pain is from the mistake. The second pain is from the guilt about the mistake. The last one I want to talk about, then I want to talk about solutions, but don't get your expectations up about solutions. And this is really the high expectations problem. You know, it ranges from the small, like you want to clean out your attic in a week, and you know, you're not going to be able to do that, and you don't do it. So you feel bad about that. You failed your own expectations. To something large and more significant, you know, you want to change someone. You want to change your partner. You want to change your life. You want to change your friend. Invariably doesn't work completely, ever, and it may not work anywhere near what you hope for, even if it works partly. Underlying problem is our expectations are unreasonable. So we're kind of doomed from the beginning when we start out with those unreasonable expectations. Again, there's a second arrow problem. We're disappointed because the person didn't change the way we want them to, and then we're feeling guilty for ourselves trying to change someone else when maybe we shouldn't do that. Let's talk about solutions a little bit. It's much easier to state the problem. You know, professional help, of course, may be one strategy. It's valuable to recognize the problem in the beginning, to identify where you want to go. That's another important step. The hardest part is to figure out the path to get there. A spiritual path may be a big part of that. Let's go back to Whitman for a moment. Think about this. Until I knew the man, it had not occurred to me that anyone could derive so much absolute happiness from these things as he did. He was very fond of flowers, either wild or cultivated, liked all sorts. All objects seemed to have a charm for him. Perhaps indeed no man ever lived who liked so many things and disliked so few as Walt Whitman. Now, why can't we be Walt Whitman? Well, I'm not a psychologist, so this is a very simplified analysis, but you know, we come into the world with DNA. We come into the world with genetic imprints and a pattern from our parents. And that probably creates some predisposition in our personality. Maybe to instinctively look for the positive or negative, maybe instinctively to feel a sense of inadequacy or a sense of being very adequate, to like people or distrust them. Somehow that DNA may have some initial influence. So we come into the world and we got a whole bunch of dials in our brain, and they're turned to a certain setting. The good thing is those are not fixed at those settings. What happens during childhood is going to change those settings. Maybe a little, maybe in a good direction, maybe in a bad direction. So we're not responsible for that first genetic pattern, and we're generally not responsible for our childhood. So people emerge from their childhood in very different places. Some people emerge with self-confidence, others with a sense of inadequacy. Some emerge with instincts to be positive about people. Some emerge with instincts to be very cynical. So in addition to all that, those settings on the dials, we have other qualities that we can't change very much. Our physical beauty, our athletic skills, the wealth of our parents, our intelligence, perhaps, genetic intelligence. So that's the hand that we're dealt with. And by and large, we're not responsible for all that. But when we emerge into adulthood, that's when we have some influence about this. Plenty of people, grow up poor with physical disabilities, end up have a very positive view of life. Some people who grew up with seemingly all the advantages of wealth and advantages can end up being bitter and essential. The good news is that we are not condemned to be the person we were when we emerged into adulthood. The settings on those dials can be changed. So let's conclude that way. I think the first step is self-awareness, is always self-awareness. Then the second step is the hard work of finding some solutions. And then the hardest is implementing them. Requires talking to others, requires listening. Now, the Walt Whitman state of mind, I think, is maybe too much to ask for. Again, I don't want to have unreasonable expectations. And the Will Rogers ideal that I never met a man I didn't like is also maybe an unrealistic expectation. And probably in real life, those people didn't really fit those ideals anyway. But they're myths. But myths are very powerful. That's why they were invented, and that's why we hold on to them. Thanks.
Step over for a second.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eddie. And we're almost ready for comments or questions, and I just ask that you please wait till you have the microphone. Anyone? Elaine.
Eddie, thank you very much for that. It really was a great one. I, as an adult, have had way too many expectations. And it takes a lot of hard work to learn not to do that as much. And my expectations was my controlling of others, wanting them to be the way that I thought they should be in my family. And it was my children. Mm-hmm. And I wanted a relationship for them together, which is too high an expectation. So, you know, it's learning to let go. It's learning to pray for them in whatever way they're going to be, and to just do the hard work of myself of letting go.
Yeah.
And thanks so much for what you said this morning. It was fantastic.
Well, this is something that Carol and I struggle with. And I know I personally struggle with. It's your expectations for your children. That's one problem. And then what it does to you when they don't meet your expectations. So you have some control over both, I think. But if you get caught in the trap that, the old saying, you know, you're never happier than your unhappiest child. That's a recipe for being unhappy right there, particularly if you have a lot of children. It's a problem, but parents fall into it, and I know exactly, you know, what you're talking about.
I want to acknowledge Buddy's sister, Lucy. She taught us something that really helped us let it go, whether it's you're confronted with somebody who is causing you grief with their words or their actions or whatever, and we call it the Lucy Wow. And she would just, she didn't know she was teaching us this, but she'd go, wow. And it, you know, it just kind of like, it doesn't really matter, wow. And I just wanted to, thank you, Lucy, because it's really, it helps.
That was because she was a middle school 5th grade art teacher. Wow.
Well, let me just say one thing about the wow factor. If you live in Washington, there are plenty of people around, you know, with pretty good resumes. And if that becomes your standard for what a worthwhile, you know, person is, bad formula.
I like the one about comparing the best, because that is a game that you can never win. So at least try to be happy with yourself.
Yeah.
Where can you win, as if winning is the ultimate goal?
Yeah, really. Yeah, the idea that it's a game that can either win or lose. That's a threshold mistake. You know. Totally agree.
A few years ago, I started a gratitude practice. I wake up in the morning, I watch the sunrise, I feel grateful for everything I'm looking at. I go through in my mind everything I'm grateful for the day, and it stays with me all day.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, at first it was, I'd slip back into my disgruntled place, but after doing a practice for a couple weeks, a couple months, I'm just grateful all day long now. And a lot of it has to do with Don.
Yeah, well, I get that.
But yeah, having a practice is an amazing thing because it reminds you of everything that you're grateful for, and you forget about all the things you're not.
Yeah, I don't mean to suggest that the Walt Whitman thing is completely a myth. I mean, I think we can be closer to being Walt Whitman. It takes some work, but doesn't come naturally.
One good piece of information is the increasing study of epigenetics. Our dial is set in our DNA, but there's a lot of study now on the factors that influence our genes. Just think of a very impoverished child living in a lead-filled home and the intellect falling because of it.
Yeah.
Epigenetics.
Yeah, it'd be nice if there was some positive epigenetics too, you know, on the other side of that. But
I thought of W.C. Fields. I never met a man who drank that I didn't like. And yes, Eddie, that is a myth, because I've met many men who drank that I didn't like, and many men who drank that I did enjoy and appreciate.
Yeah.
A recipe for me, when you speak of expectations, is to be able, for me, to center yourself, to be able to give without expectations, and to be able to receive without feeling obligated. And that's a balance that keeps me on the horizon.
Yeah, yeah.
So you talk about the expectations of trying to keep your dopamine up and trying to be happy all the time, and a lot of people have that belief that that's what happiness is being happy all the time. But if you think about the Buddhists and their idea of the wheel of life, if you try to run on top of the wheel like you're running on a log in a river, you're going to fall off, and then the wheel's going to run over you. So
Yeah.
rather than trying to stay on top of the wheel and spending all your energy trying to keep yourself happy up there, live in the hub of the wheel where things are equanimous. I guess that's the word, if I did it right. But you know, it may not be as high of a high, but it's not as low of a low.
Yeah.
And you learn to acclimate yourself to being happy with what you have, and being content. Contentment is so underrated.
Yeah. Well, I do think Eastern religion, and there are lots of Eastern religions and a lot of different traditions, but the common theme in Eastern religion is the solution is internal, not external. And I think a lot of this, what we're talking about here, I think the solution is internal in the sense that finding, some spiritual path that works for you.
Thank you, Eddie. A really wonderful talk and timely. But that brings me to think about wanting things to be, that suffering is wanting things to be other than what they are. And there was a period where I was dealing with things and family members that I wanted it to be other than what it was. And when I finally, and again, it was internal work, and that observation, that awareness of, oh my gosh, this is my wanting to control the situation. This is my wanting it to be other than what it is. And when I could just suddenly fall back and rest in, this is what is. So then what do I want to bring to my life?
Mm-hmm.
And that made a huge difference. So that was, again, a Buddhist teaching that really helped me.
Yeah, great.
So recently I listened to a podcast on gratitude and the practice of listing what you're grateful for, and there's some new evidence that supports the power of having gratitude is within the interaction that you have with another or with
Mm-hmm.
the universe,
Yeah.
and that the benefit comes from the emotional charge of that interaction.
Mhm.
So that, and I thought that was an interesting thing to ponder, that it's more than just having the awareness, which I think is very good.
Yeah.
But experiencing that gratitude as you are giving or receiving
Yeah.
from another entity.
Yeah, that makes me think of the line in that Whitman description that it didn't really matter what the flowers were, if they were objectively spectacular or objectively beautiful. It was the interaction with whatever flowers, he came upon. Yes.
So Eddie, I appreciate kind of one of the themes that Jeff brought up, which is, and also epigenetics, because ultimately, if we've got patterns, and one of the things that I love about you, you've just given us a number of descriptions that allow us to bring it into consciousness. But again, the work is not, we can't do about anything that's not in consciousness. So your descriptors are really that's kind of a great kind of perspective about, like, what are those kinds of things that I'm doing or experiencing. Once I get them into consciousness, and this is a practice that I have, it's based on Tonglen, which is a Tibetan practice, but it's about separating myself from the experience I'm having, being able to look at it objectively. And that's the Tonglen piece, because when we can look at it objectively, then we can say, I've had this challenge or this difficulty, and now I can be compassionate for other people who don't have the time or ability to look at it objectively and are stuck in that issue. And I can send out love. That helps us create new neural pathways. And it helps us learn to manage our mind rather than allowing our mind or emotions to manage us. The other really cool thing that's happening at this point in time in terms of this 24,000-year journey that we go around the center of the universe is that the energies now, if we bring it into consciousness, we can, and something comes up, there's a challenge that we have, or a issue that we remember from the past and it's bothering us. Rather than try to solve it, if we say, oh my goodness, there's that thought, I now can release that thought for healing. And that, again, is a little bit far out there for many people who are materialists, but from an energetic perspective, there's great energies on the planet right now, and they're increasing around healing. And so what you provided, Eddie, is a wonderful door to say, if I want to practice something or heal it, then I've got it in consciousness now. And the key piece is, and again, you've mentioned it and it's been mentioned here, is that you only do that through an inner journey. You can't do that in the outside world. And the outside world teaches us to find the solutions out there. So getting to the point to realize that actually the only solutions for us and all the solutions are internally within us. And that's our connection to the universe, part of the quantum field. So thank you so much.
Yeah, well, I agree with a lot of what you say. I do think that you might need help going through the door, kind of hard work to do on your own. But thanks. Happy Thanksgiving.